Sources close to the investigation say the situation inside Nancy Guthrie's home was even more troubling than what has been shared publicly. According to information relayed by a well-placed law enforcement source, there were multiple cameras at the property, not just one, and those cameras were reportedly destroyed. During an earlier press conference, NewsNation's Brian Entin pressed Sheriff Chris Nanos about the missing camera at the front of the house. The sheriff acknowledged investigators were working to obtain any cloud-based footage from the companies that manage that kind of data, but as of that update, authorities still had not recovered whatever may have been recorded. What has since emerged is that the devices were said to be Nest cameras, and more than one was involved. That detail matters. If the cameras were smashed rather than simply taken down, it suggests whoever entered the house knew surveillance was in place and acted deliberately to erase the visual trail before carrying out the abduction of an 84-year-old woman with extremely limited mobility. The absence of those cameras now appears less like a mystery and more like a calculated move, with investigators believed to have taken the damaged devices into evidence. Another development raising eyebrows is the reported towing and impoundment of a vehicle belonging to Annie Guthrie, Nancy Guthrie's daughter. At the same time, observations made at the house added another unsettling layer. When Brian Entin approached the front entrance, he reportedly saw blood on the ground near the front mat and stoop. By all accounts, it was not an overwhelming amount, but it was visible enough to stand out. That sight came after the residents had already been released back to the family, with the crime scene tape removed and law enforcement gone from the property. Investigators are also said to be paying close attention to a critical time marker connected to Nancy Guthrie's medical technology. Nancy reportedly had a pacemaker paired with Apple devices, including an Apple Watch and iPhone that were left inside the home. Around 2 a.m., the connection between the pacemaker and those devices was said to have been lost. That timestamp has become especially significant because it suggests not that the pacemaker failed, but that Nancy herself was moved beyond Bluetooth range while her phone and watch remained behind. The physical layout of the evidence has only deepened the intrigue. A source familiar with the case says the back door of the home was found wide open. Whether it was used for entry or escape remains unclear, but that detail, combined with blood reportedly found at the front door, points to activity in more than one part of the house. It raises the possibility of a sequence that began in one area, moved through the residence, and ended somewhere else, with a confrontation unfolding along the way. The front entrance tells its own story. Blood was still reportedly visible near the stoop, and the camera that once sat above the doorway, near where a doorbell device would normally be placed, was no longer there. Reportedly, those were Nest cameras, not Ring devices as had initially circulated. And if they were truly smashed, that implies planning, force, and familiarity. Someone appears to have known there was more than one camera and where each was positioned, a detail that naturally pushes investigators to consider whether the person had prior knowledge of the property. The timeline adds even more weight to those suspicions. The last known family contact with Nancy Guthrie reportedly came when she was dropped off at home around 9:45 p.m. Saturday night by her daughter Annie, possibly with Annie's husband, Thomas Oyen, also present. The following morning, concern escalated when church members noticed Nancy had not shown up, something they considered highly unusual. A family member then went to the home, made contact with others, and 911 was eventually called, setting the investigation into motion. One of the most closely watched developments in the case is the reported seizure of Annie Guthrie's vehicle. That car, the one Nancy Guthrie had reportedly ridden in the night before she vanished, has now been towed and impounded as evidence, according to a law enforcement source. Annie, known publicly as Savannah Guthrie's sister, was among the last people believed to have seen Nancy alive, and the decision to take the vehicle into custody signals that investigators are looking beyond routine interviews and into the realm of physical forensic review. Sources familiar with the inquiry say investigators are focused on motive as much as opportunity. The logic, as described by one source, is stark. Abducting an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility would be a difficult and highly specific act. Nancy reportedly could not walk more than about 50 yards on her own and depended on daily medication. That makes this look far less like a random burglary gone wrong and far more like an incident involving someone who had a particular reason to target her. Because of that, detectives are said to be examining who might benefit from Nancy's disappearance, whether financially or otherwise. Insurance concerns, debt, and other entanglements are reportedly part of the broader picture being reviewed. One source said Annie Guthrie's husband, Thomas Oyen, had drawn particularly close scrutiny in the earliest stage of the case, though the same source stressed that such attention does not amount to guilt. In high-profile disappearances, investigators often begin with those nearest to the victim before expanding outward. That process, while unsettling, is standard. Families are often examined first because they are closest to the timeline, the victim's habits, and the property itself. Law enforcement sources have emphasized that this does not mean relatives are responsible, it simply reflects the normal path of a serious investigation. Still, towing a family member's vehicle is a consequential step. It suggests authorities believed there was enough reason to preserve the car as evidence rather than leave it in private hands. The home's location also adds a dramatic and difficult dimension to the mystery. Reports from the scene describe the neighborhood as exceptionally dark, tucked into the foothills with homes spread across large parcels of land. This is not a tightly packed suburban block where porch lights and nearby neighbors might easily catch suspicious movement. The properties reportedly sit on 1 to 4 acres, with desert brush, cactus, and wild terrain stretching behind them. At night, the area becomes nearly pitch black. That landscape matters because it sharply limits what could have happened. Moving an elderly woman with mobility issues through rugged desert terrain in darkness would have been nearly impossible without a vehicle positioned nearby. In other words, whoever took Nancy likely needed transportation close to the house. And while the darkness may have offered cover, it also reduced the usefulness of ambient lighting for any nearby residential surveillance. In a setting like that, the home's own cameras would have been especially important, which makes their reported destruction all the more significant. The camera angle may ultimately become one of the most crucial threads in the entire case. Reports indicate the Nest cameras were not subtly disabled or casually removed, but smashed. That distinction is enormous. If they were transmitting before they were destroyed, investigators may still be able to recover footage from the cloud showing the approach to the home and the first moments before the devices went offline. At the time of the reporting, authorities were still said to be waiting for Nest-related data, with the sheriff openly frustrated by the delay after roughly 72 hours had already passed. By this stage, the case had already become a maze of troubling details. Blood was reportedly found both inside the home and outside near the front door. The back door was said to have been left wide open. The cameras were reportedly destroyed. The pacemaker connection dropped at around 2 a.m. A family vehicle was seized into evidence. Investigators were also said to be reviewing cell phone pings and geofencing data to identify every device that may have been in the area during the suspected abduction window. The setting of the home may have complicated the search for answers. In a neighborhood so dark and spread out, there may be fewer neighboring cameras, fewer street views, and fewer witnesses able to notice unusual activity. The sheriff reportedly declined at one point to confirm forced entry publicly, yet a law enforcement source later described that element far more definitively, saying there had in fact been forced entry. Similarly, while blood was not confirmed from the podium, reporting from the scene and source-based information suggested blood was present both outside and within the residence. At the center of all of it is Nancy Guthrie, a mother still missing and a family facing mounting scrutiny as investigators work through every angle. Her medication was reportedly left behind, a deeply troubling detail given official comments that going without it for more than 24 hours could be life-threatening. Her Apple-connected devices remained in the house. Her pacemaker reportedly disconnected from them in the middle of the night. And investigators continue to examine everyone who may have had access to the home, to Nancy herself, and to the family's inner circle. Authorities have urged anyone with information to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The reward has reportedly climbed above $1.2 million, underscoring just how serious and high-stakes this case has become. For now, the story remains active, fast-moving, and far from resolved. This material is presented in an analytical and informational style based on publicly discussed reporting and source-based claims. It does not represent official conclusions. Every individual referenced is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty, and viewers should consult additional independent reporting for the fullest possible understanding of the case.
We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.